Okay, now as you can see, I went ahead and did a little bit more painting. I've pretty much finished the gray areas anyway for the robot head, but I gotta admit it's kind of a pain in the neck to constantly be going back to the options bar drop-down menu, adjusting my size larger or smaller depending on the nook and cranny that I'm trying to paint here, right? It's kind of a lot of back and forth. So I'm going to show you a really cool technique for speeding things up there for you. But before I show you that, I want to mention one other quick thing here. I'm just going to pan down a little bit towards his sort of his shoulders and his chest area. The idea of hardness. I don't know if you've messed around with your hardness slider or not, but right now I'm on 53%, so about halfway, right? And if I paint in there, I have a slightly soft edge. Maybe what I should do is increase my brush size so you can see this a little bit better here. So something like this. There's a slight soft or feathered edge there on my brush, which is great, right? But if I head back to the drop down on the options bar and I increase the hardness way up to 100%, let's compare 50% to 100%. So there's 100%. So 100% means 100% hard. So I have a perfectly solid edge. There's no feathering on that edge at all, right? And then if I head back to the drop-down menu up at the top, and I reduce my hardness all the way down to nothing, all the way down to 0%. Let's see what we get now. So now I'll click and drag, and now, as you can see, I get this very, very soft feathered edge brush, right? So that's the idea behind the hardness slider inside that drop-down menu. Now, I mentioned that I wanted to speed things up here a little bit, and I want to show you some techniques for speeding things up. First of all, I very, very rarely head up to the drop-down menu on the options bar and adjust both my size and my hardness. Instead, what I do is I use keyboard shortcuts. So check this out. I'm going to use my open square bracket key and my close square bracket key to either increase or decrease the size of my brush. So the open square bracket reduces the size of my brush so I can get into the, the small detail-y type areas. And then when I have large areas that I want to paint, all I do is I tap that close square bracket key quite a few times there to give me a nice large brush where I can paint in large sort of swaths of color, I guess you could say. So that's a cool trick. And then we also have keyboard shortcuts for adjusting that hardness value as well. So give this a try. I'm going to reduce down the size of my brush just a little bit. So I just tapped my open square bracket key just a couple of times there. And now what I want to do is I want to make my brush harder. I want a harder edged brush, right? So I'm going to hold down the shift key and I'm going to tap my close square bracket key just a couple of times there. And now I have a very hard edged brush. So shift and close square bracket gives you a very hard edged brush. I'm going to hold down the shift key and tap my open square bracket a couple of times there. And now I have a very soft edged brush. So there's a couple of very cool keyboard shortcuts to help you move a little bit faster while you're painting your cartoons and your artwork here inside Photoshop. So I'm going to leave it up to you to do a little bit of painting on your own. I did want to mention too a couple of quick things running across the top of the Photoshop interface on the options bar. We have our blending mode drop-down menu. If you know about blending modes, we already saw multiply earlier, but of course there's lots of them in here. Overlay and difference and divide and all kinds of great stuff. So you have your blending modes. So in other words, you can paint with a blending mode. We don't have to paint with 100% opacity. We can reduce that down if we want to. Sometimes what I'll wind up doing is I'll wind up having more than one color layer to build up shadows. And I'll do that by reducing the opacity of some of my different painting effects. We also have a flow option, and we have an airbrush option as well, and there's a few other options there as well. You've got this fella here. If you have a tablet attached to your computer, you can make use of your tablet pressure controls. And we also have this fella here, which also relates to our tablet pressure opacity. So if you have a tablet, I am definitely jealous because I'm going to have to paint this guy all by hand. But anyway, there you go. So as I say, I will leave it up to you to do a little bit more painting on your own. And when you and I catch up, I'll show you some other neat painting techniques.